You got to work within, and you've got to work from the outside. I know you've always been, you're independent, right?
I'm in Oregon, which is also closed primary, so I'm technically a registered Democrat. I will say I'm registered in 2016, but if I wanted to vote for Bernie, had to re-register as a Democrat. So I'm not an independent technically, but ideologically,
like
I
you
don't.
would be if you could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that most people would be, which is why they're not going to let us do that. We're like hostages in these cults that are controlling the electoral process, which is it's problematic. It's very problematic. And nobody's really talking about that. And it's only one party, really. I mean, really,
do
we really have, because there's no Labor Party.
There's no Labor Party. There's no viable socialist party. I like to liken it to like an abusive spousal relationship, to where it's like we can't leave because we have nowhere else to go, and if we do leave, eventually we end up getting back together because, I mean, the alternative is so bad. So Democrats, they're in this really convenient situation to where they don't have to really change much. I mean, sure, their base will get turned off from time to time, but they know that so long as Republicans take power and show everyone how crazy they are, everyone will come right back to Democrats because, again, like, what other choice is there that's viable? And this is why I've been such a huge advocate of electoral reform. We need ranked choice voting. Alaska just passed it. This would help so much, and it doesn't get talked about because as much frustration as there is with both parties, there's not enough support for this idea that we need electoral reform. I see, efforts to build a third party encouraging, but you can build as many parties as you want. As if we don't change the electoral institutions, they'll be marginalized permanently. And I want people to get in the mindset of trying to attack that like head on. Like I think that these ranked choice voting ballot initiatives is really the way to go. You can't do this in every single state, but it's a really good start.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to go that route here. I mean, obviously, we have a very Republican legislature that we're never getting that done in any other way. That's never, and we'll be underwater before that happens here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the entire process is set up in such a way that it just keeps it churning exactly the way it is, and it's it's definitely very fixed to be that way, and we know it is. We know it's by design that it just sort of keeps rotating like this. But we did see some good successes in this past election. We did see, and certainly on a local level, we did. We also passed a $15 minimum wage in Florida. So, I mean, we have some promising outlooks, I thought. What are your thoughts in terms of where we are as a progressive movement at a local level for a lot of places versus at the national level?
Locally, I agree with you. I think that there's a lot more reason to be optimistic. These races are much more winnable, and it's hard to run a campaign for U.S. Congress. It's really tough. It's necessary that we have people to do that. But I think that, like, when you look at the success rate of DSA-backed local candidates, just for like city council here and there, it's really, really encouraging to see. And it's something that I think we're going to continue to see, because a lot of folks don't necessarily follow local politics. I'm guilty of that as well, and it's hard because the national government it controls so much of our lives. But I think that it's a really nice and easy way in, and like we have to take strategic cues from the Republican Party. They leave no stone unturned. They went for the judiciary, local politics. And it's tough. Like, we have to recalibrate a little bit because we were this close to capturing the presidency, like the left. And that's really, it's exciting, but at the same time, we didn't make it. So now we have to try to reassess and figure out how we take power. And I think that we are slowly but surely moving in the correct direction. I do feel encouraged at these ballot initiatives. I mean, what was it, like 4 more states legalized cannabis, recreational? My state of Oregon, we decriminalized all drugs, which was just so exciting. So I mean, there's a demand. It's just a matter of like, how do we fulfill that demand? What can we do? And I think that we, as a movement, we should be introspective, because I don't want to be like, I know that I'm right. I know that strategically, if the Democratic Party moved left and embraced progressivism, they would be more successful. But at the same
Oh,
time, I do think that as a leftist movement, we always have to reassess and be able to adapt because, this there's not always going to be one fixed solution that remains static. Political problems oftentimes change a lot. It's like trying to hit a moving target. So we have to find out what works and what doesn't work, and we have to change. And that's tough because, different states are going to have different solutions and different problems. So we have to be introspective. And I'm trying to have an open mind going forward about what we do as a movement to actually achieve power and make real change. And I think that it's an open question. I genuinely don't know. I think there are things that we learned from this election, takeaways that are important, but I think we continue to grow. And that's really what's important is open-mindedness and, trying to find new ways to reach more people, because that's the struggle. We were close in this last election. Bernie almost made it over the finish line,
yeah.
but certain conditions and factors prevented that from happening. So we
I
gotta
mean, we know what
adapt.
happened. We know what happened.
Yeah, yeah.
We're very clear on what happened there. But I do feel somewhat optimistic about what I'm seeing locally, and I do think that that is what most impacts our regular lives, is what happens at our local levels. And I think that it's important as Democrats to be strategic wherever we can be strategic, but anywhere now, like you have Alaska with ranked choice voting, that is prime opportunity for third parties to come in there at local levels and at state levels and just try to make some inroads. Like that would be, that's where we need to be strategic, is getting in the places. Like, I mean, I know you were supportive of the movement for a People's Party.
Yeah. Yeah.
As am I. It's one of those things, like, would you agree that we have to be doing it inside and out? Like we have to be doing it on both fronts simultaneously.
100%. I think that there's absolutely no room to just like pursue one strategy. We have to try everything. We don't have a choice. I think that the movement for the People's Party is really, really important. We have to be able to show the country and the Democratic Party that there's a demand for, change, for this leftist politics, and there's a hunger for this. And the movement for the People's Party kind of demonstrates that. And my hope with that is there's some way that the People's Party and maybe the Green Party can come together to create this sort of outside movement. But, for people who are frustrated with the slow takeover of the Democratic Party, I hear you, but we can't abandon that, because if we abandon
What's
that,
the alternative?
Exactly. So we have to do everything.
Right.
I think that unless we get electoral reform, then we're not going to see a successful third party. That doesn't mean that third parties aren't important and don't matter and can't influence the two main parties. But I think that we have to really broaden our approach. Like, I want to see a movement for electoral reform. That's what I really want to see, because it's hard, but it's not as hard as people make it out to be. There's legislation already in Congress. HR 4000 is probably going to switch to a different number come January. But it's introduced by Don Byers. It does enact nationwide ranked choice voting. It ends gerrymandering, and we move to a multi-member district system. So we have multiple representatives. We don't have to worry about these weirdly drawn districts that keep safe. It's an like.
How do you fix that though? Like, let's say something like that passes. Who gets to like come in and design? I mean, I just have this idea that they should be completely convex. All districts should be somewhat convex in nature and not be cut in weird shapes. But how does that happen? It would be each state deciding how to do that. Like, I don't know how you could even mandate that.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure about how that would be enacted from a logistical standpoint, but with multi-member districts, the reason why that's really important, and it opens, like, it doesn't guarantee that third parties will be viable immediately, but what it does do is it opens that door, because we all have one representative, right? And if the person who we support loses, we get zero representation. And with multi-member districts, rather than having just like one person represent us, maybe we have two or three. So that way the second and third option, like, it's more proportional. And what you see is in systems with proportional representation, they actually have much more parties. Like Germany, for example, I believe it has mixed member proportional. And they might split up like where you vote for a party and individuals. In the Bundestag, I'm not sure. It's been a while, but they have like 5 or 6 parties, and there's a real variety there. They have a Social Democratic Party, which is kind of like a Democrat party, even though they're called Social Democrats. They have a Green Party that actually was in a government coalition. They have a Conservative Party that isn't crazy. but they also have some far right parties that can't be as far right as in the United States.
Well,
We need, like, I don't want just a third party. Like, we
right.
want like
No.
6 parties. You know what I
I
mean?
know.
Like,
Well, it's funny is I always tell people I'd be happy if we actually had two. Because I really, we really have one. So it's
that's a
just,
great way to put
one,
it.
it's like that meme with the bomber jet, but one of the jets has the rainbow flag on it while it's dropping the bombs on the country. And the people down below are so thankful that that's the new, how they're so tolerant, the new administration.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, if we had 2 parties, that'd be phenomenal because
Right?
yeah, it's so frustrating and it's hard. Like when you are trying to explain the differences between Democrats and Republicans, the line is like so blurred. Like you really have to dig for it. Like how does the average
I
person do that? Like of course, like the rhetoric that Trump and Republicans use is different than Democrats, but when it comes to like economics and foreign policy, like you have to dig to find differences, and it shouldn't be that
I
hard.
don't even think you can. I mean, Joe hasn't met a war he hasn't liked. I mean, what difference would there be? He would not have moved. I do not believe he would have moved the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem.
I do agree with that. Although I don't think he's going to move it back.
Again, no comment, a prediction, but that is not something that a Democrat would have done.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Iran escalation with Iran,
yes,
North Korea, I don't think he would have started a war with Iran. It's nice that Trump is pursuing peace, although what he was pursuing with North Korea, ironically, looked a lot like the Iran deal, but not as strong. It's just, it really is frustrating when you have change on the outside, continuity on the inside, because there's going to be a lot of improvements that Biden can make. I mean, just by getting back into the Paris Climate Accord.
Yes.
Awesome. That's great. If he reinstates DACA, that's millions of lives that are better off. But in terms of like the overall well-being of people, materially speaking, I mean, poverty isn't going to be even attacked at all. Like, what are we going to be able to do? And that's why I really want the Democrats to take back the Senate, not just because Republicans are crazy, but I want there to be accountability. Like, explain to us now, if you have control of government fully, why didn't we get all of these improvements?
Why didn't we get a public option under Obama when he had complete control? And now we're first fighting as if getting back to the Obamacare without the public option. Now that's what's on the table. Like our deal keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And they're selling it like it's somehow helping us. And it's just so bizarre. So the Romney care without the public option that was now being threatened to be taken away, you're bragging about bringing back to us. That's what we have.
It's like, and it's frustrating because like I see people online on Twitter, the blue check marks, we all know who it is, who like, if you criticize Joe Biden, it's like blasphemy. Where it's like, hey, the election is over. It's done. So now we have to fight him because sure, Trump was defeated. Awesome. That's really great. But Joe Biden is still someone who is going to do damage. Like I always say, it's not a matter of like pushing him left because that would assume that he's malleable in the first place. It's a matter of fighting him because a lot of what he wants to do is going to be troubling. I mean, look at who he just chose as his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Really? Tony Blinken, someone who is pro-apartheid in Israel? Someone who loves war, who might be to the right of Biden on foreign policy. It's just, it's frustrating. So, on one hand, if we don't criticize Joe Biden, then he gets away with it. But if we do, then the centrists are like, oh, see, the left is unreasonable. It's like we have to basically just do what's right because no matter what we do, the optics will always be bad for us because the narrative is always that the left is like unreasonable and terrible people. But that's not true. I genuinely believe that we are on the right side of history, and that is going to be reflected in the history books if humanity doesn't kill itself.
Right,
we just have to keep fighting.
Else in the world, we're right in the middle. Well, at least maybe
totally.
left of center. Like that's I don't even entertain that anymore. I don't even like using the terms the left and even progressive. It's just like, we're just so into we're into our labels. We're very into our labels.
It doesn't mean anything either. Like when I hear progressive,
what does that mean now? Debbie Wasserman Schultz did a commercial where she said she was progressive.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. My issues with Joe aren't that I think there's any way we're pushing him to the left because he's not going anywhere.
It's not going to happen.
I feel like it is incumbent upon me to make sure that I'm constantly railing about him being accountable for what he has done, both policy-wise and credible sexual assault allegations that have not
Exactly.
been answered for. And even though I very begrudgingly did vote for Joe, and it's still not something I'm happy about, but whatever, none of that negates that I find him personally accountable for a lot of things that are wrong right now. And until he acknowledges that. So, I mean, pushing him left, we can't even get him to acknowledge that certain things weren't okay. Even now that we know they weren't okay. We know that the crime bill, not good. We know that the cocaine crack bill, not good.
Yeah,
You know?
and I'm sorry, but like I'm the Medicare for all thing. I'm so tired of them not supporting Medicare for all. They're basically pro-death. That's like I'm done characterizing it as anything else. And I think that you and I actually talked about this before, where it's like if you're comfortable with 67,000 Americans dying every single year without healthcare, which is a conservative estimate, then you're a terrible person and you're unreasonable. You know, and his refusal to support Medicare for all.
That's what people.
Yes,
that's radical.
Right.
It really, to most places in the world that have the capability of having healthcare, that position would be considered wackadoo.
Yeah. I mean, even Boris Johnson, like he wants to chip away at the UK's national health system, but he still publicly has to acknowledge, yes, our universal healthcare system is amazing. We love it. And the same is true for conservatives in Canada.
Yeah. So you can go to the most conservative person in any of those countries, and they still believe that healthcare is a human right.
Yeah. But Joe Biden does too. He says it.
That's like the access to affordable healthcare, and so that certain special people can have that access to the affordable healthcare. That's not. I stopped debating Medicare for all a long time ago. It's to me, it's now in the category with like the flat earthers or creationists or people like that. Like I'm just not. It's ridiculous at this point. It's just ridiculous, and the fact that some of these people are still saying that is just it's mind blowing.
Yeah, I love that. It is comparable to flat earthers, even QAnoners, because we know what's happening. Like there's study after study that shows the pain that this causes. There are anecdotes that shows what this does to people. Amy Vilela lost her daughter and ran for Congress, and Democrats still wouldn't embrace her. It's unforgivable. And for all the Democrats who are, heartbroken by all of the deaths due to COVID-19, where was their concern with thousands of people dying every single year, due to no healthcare? It's infuriating to me when I really think about this, and I just I stew over, like, it pisses me off. And Republicans are the same, of course, but Democrats, they're supposed to be held to a higher standard because they say that they're better. But if you turn a blind eye when that many Americans are dying every single year, you're irredeemable. You are comparable to the flat earthers. Like, I think that's a perfect way to describe it.
I think it's interesting how quickly the Democrats were, even Joe Biden during the campaign, to be talking about how everything for COVID should be free. Nobody should have to pay for COVID testing. And I remember when I first started hearing that, I'm like, okay, but cancer or other things, not so much. Like, why? I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be paying for COVID. I do not understand why that, but what about diabetes, or how about, I don't know, heart disease? There's all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, it makes no sense. All of these things are out of people's controls. If you get cancer, you can't control that. So why should you be burdened because of something you didn't choose? I mean, like, even something as simple as like glasses, like, I didn't choose to have terrible vision. Why should I have to pay $1,000 because the insurance I already pay for doesn't cover my glasses? Like, it's these little things. And thankfully, I'm in a privileged position to where I can get my glasses every 2 years, but other people can't do that. And it's so disappointing that more people don't see it this way. And they don't see how radical it is to be against healthcare for everyone.
Yeah. And it's eyes and teeth. And it's so bizarre to me that somehow in this country is not included in healthcare.
Right? It's part of your body.
And it's not only that, but we know that a lot of things related to dental stuff affect health stuff. Like, this is not complicated stuff. We have horrible health outcomes. We spend the most money. I mean, even when I talk to people now that don't see it from a moral perspective, I won't even debate it because it makes more sense from an economic perspective.
Totally.
And so there is no evidence that doing anything other than that is the way to go. There isn't. And
No.
so we shouldn't even, like, that's the thing. Like, why entertain that anymore?
It's not debatable. We already won this debate, and we convinced the American people
Yeah.
that this is the way to go. So give it to us. Like that's where we're at. Like we shouldn't have to convince Congress and call it. Like, I mean, we do, but we shouldn't have to. It's infuriating. And even like the people who purport to be allies, like Elizabeth Warren, which is hilarious. Like when you look through the details of her Medicare for All plan, which was really a public option, she even left out like mental health. So we're picking and choosing. Like, well, your mind is a part of your body. So why are we leaving that out? Why are we leaving out dental? As you talked about, it's just it's so exhausting and infuriating.